Uh, Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have a conversation with you all today. For those of you that registered and saw everything from our joint session with Full Story, we started and framed something with a quote. And before we get started and talk through logistics and introduce the wonderful person we get to talk to today, I want to read that quote and take a moment and absorb what that means as you start thinking about retail and how it impacts you and how important personalization is. In a world of abundant choice and largely frictionless access, being a little bit of everything to everybody often means nothing of necessary relevance to anybody. I love that quote, and I love that we have the author of that quote here to talk to us a little bit today. So, let me talk a little bit about the logistics for the session. This is will be a fireside chat. Myself and our guest will go back and forth, talk about retail, talk about personalization, share experiences from both of us. This is a Q&A. It's great for the two of us to do a lot of chatting, but we want to hear your voice. So please add your questions. We'll make time throughout the session to answer those questions and wrap with a Q&A at the end. With that, let me do quick introductions. So I'm Ben Van Glovic. I am a tech partner here at Wizeline, and I have the fortunate side of being able to work with lots of different companies all over the world on helping them think through how to leverage technology. And then today, I'm fortunate in the fact that I have Steve Dennis here, who is a thought leader in the retail space. He is a ex-executive from Neiman Marcus, did a lot of innovations there, and wrote the book Remarkable Retail. Has a highly successful podcast, and as I mentioned before, he's the author of that particular quote that kind of framed us today. So, welcome, Steve. I'm glad that you're able to join us today. Do you mind sharing a bit about your journey and the critical role and relevant a little bit of your journey and how it connects to your work, and a little bit about that quote?
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks to everybody for joining. So yeah, just quickly a little bit about my background. So I have been in retail almost my entire career. I did a couple of other things after I got out of business school, but since the early '90s, so quite a long time now, because I'm old. I've been working in retail. About half of my time was spent on the operating leadership side. Started my career actually at Sears Roebuck and Company and did quite a lot of things there, eventually moving up to the senior leadership team. 2004, I joined the Neiman Marcus Group, initially as the head of strategy and business development, picked up a bunch of additional responsibilities that actually are pretty relevant to what we're going to talk about today. I ended up forming a central customer insight group, worked on a lot of our target marketing strategies, loyalty strategies, CRM, those kinds of things. And then I went off on my own, oh, I guess it's 15 or 16 years ago, doing strategy consulting, mostly for people in the retail industry. And that's kind of morphed to doing keynote speaking, launching the Remarkable Retail podcast, writing the book Remarkable Retail, and then this year, a new book called Leaders Leap. And so, it's ended up being kind of an interesting mix of things. I guess, to answer your question about kind of my journey to this topic today, one of the things I started to really notice, I mean, probably actually about 15 years ago, but really zoomed in on about 10 years ago, was what I call the collapse of the middle. And that gets back to the quote you read, which is as digital grew, as we saw more fragmentation in the market, as we have kind of the long tail of choice and 24/7 access, it became harder and harder to kind of stake out a competitive position in the middle of the market. You tended to see success more on the value end of the spectrum, or success on the luxury or more specialty side. But these retailers like department stores, for example, or some category killers that are a little bit of everything, tended to really struggle. So some of that is very particular to the kind of business model you have and a lot of the shifts we've seen in retail. But a lot of it gets to this challenge of when you have abundant choice, when we live in a noisy world, how do you actually stand out in the market and get people's attention, but in particular become highly differentiated and really relevant. And the more I think we can develop more personalization strategies, and that means a lot of different things, which I guess we can get into, but personalization to me has become more and more important if you're going to get noticed in the first place, but in particular if you're going to engage with a customer, get the sale, build loyalty, get high net promoter scores, and all those kinds of things.
In your book, the you have your eight essentials, and
Right.
two of them really come to relevant to me, and as I think about that, the retail brands that I'm very close to, and that is the ones that are memorable and the ones that are very human centered.
Yeah.
How do you see those play and some of the other eight essentials in someone's retail strategy?
Sure. Well, I won't go too much into detail about the eight essentials, other than to say what I was trying to do was find those things that are important for most retailers to execute well against or differentiate themselves if they're going to be remarkable. And just maybe a quick word on what I mean about being remarkable. It's really this idea of both probably the common understanding of the word remarkable is doing something really unique, different, that really grabs people attention, but it's also literally this idea of sharing the story of your brand. So as people that know Seth Godin's work and his book Purple Cow, it's very much stolen from there, which is how do you get people to talk about and share the story of your brand? That gives you so much power in the marketplace. So I try to lay out these eight essentials. Six of the eight are really what I would call almost table stakes today, and then two are really differentiating. So the two you mentioned, one's kind of a table stake and one is really a differentiator. So this idea of being human centered is really deeply understanding customers both from a more kind of rational basis, what's on their spec sheet for what they're looking to buy, what are the minimum requirements in terms of needs, but it also gets to trying to understand more their wants and desires and making this emotional connection. And what I see a lot of times with retailers that struggle is they get overly focused on kind of the left brain part of the equation and not enough on really understanding what customers are trying to achieve from a technical standpoint, but even more from an emotional standpoint. So I think it's really this idea of understanding customers in a much deeper way, and particularly connecting with the human side of things, the more emotional side. Memorable is one of the differentiating factors. This is probably the thing that lines up the most with this idea of being remarkable. How do you create something that really stands out from the crowd, that creates distance between you and your next best competitor, and not just because you get some Instagram post or TikTok video to go viral. Like that's great, that could be helpful, but how do you build that sustainable advantage over time? And what we see with a lot of retailers that struggle is they do what I just call a slightly better version of mediocre. They're not doing anything that's really that profound. And if they create any kind of edge, it's so minor that it's not going to get them that attention win. That's not going to get them that engagement, and it's not going to develop the profitable relationships that we need.
So I mean that's interesting for those middle part of the market that is now getting kind of pushed between the value and the specialty that you've kind of looking at. What are other ways that they can provide some sort of signal amongst the noise? Otherwise, you're actually right. They're not going to differentiate enough. They're not going to provide that value. They're not going to provide that other kind of emotional connection,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
they're going to continue to struggle in this climate that we have today, where uh, things are more expensive. It's harder,
right.
but the great ones are figuring it
Yeah,
out. What are they
right.
doing differently?
Well, I think there's one aspect which is more of what I would call a structural issue, and that's probably not so much what we're going to talk about today. But you can certainly look at, for example, moderate department stores, which have a lot of just fundamental distribution issues, which is their business model is built for a different time. As things have shifted, not only the collapse of the middle, but less traffic on the mall, those kinds of things. Those are bigger issues, and there are definitely some things that could be done around the edges. But if you're if you've got a lot of investment that's fundamentally in the wrong area, that's a much bigger issue. But we see plenty of retailers that are really digging into their customer data, as well as trying to understand these emotional connections, maybe through research or customer journey mapping or what have you, to try to figure out where are these more targeted opportunities. So often what I recommend, aside from, the more you can leverage your data, the better, is also doing more of customer journey mapping by different types of customers. And you really have two lenses on this. One, which is the more kind of pedestrian way of looking at it, but it often can be a good unlock, is where are there points of friction in that customer journey? Where are there elements of dissatisfaction? Do you have a bad shopping cart? Is your signage not good? Like, some of these things could be pretty mundane, but oftentimes when you do this work, you uncover some opportunities to deal with these dissatisfiers. And that at least keeps you in the game. I think the more interesting part is to try to find those areas where you can do what I call amplify the wow. How do you do one, two, three things that are really, really powerful that will really make a difference? And in many cases, there are things you can do that work for many customers across the board. But, to get to the topic of this conversation is, where can you find opportunities to treat different customers differently? To me, that's been my mantra for 20 years, which I didn't come up with. But, fundamentally, many customers are quite different. They have different needs, wants, things they value. So how can you understand differences between your customer base and then actually try to find something that is more, whether it's literally personalized, one-to-one marketing kinds of things or one-to-one sort of experiences, or is it more a mass customized approach where you create much more relevance for a set of customers that allows you to break through the clutter, break through the noise, but hopefully get that engagement, get the sale, start to build a more profitable relationship over time.
No, that makes sense. I mean, there are several retailers in that what you're describing about customer journeys, the wow moment, really looking at their data. And it's a retailer that we've been working with. They've been trying to do more in their pet area, and they
Mm-hmm.
recognize that pet owners and associates that work for the company, that they all love pets. And when you have
Mm-hmm.
pet people talk about pets, they get more sales. And the friction that often comes with them is not that conversation. It's not enabling that conversation. It's the other operational needs that they have to run their business. And the
Mm-hmm.
more you can transform it, the more you can make that seamless, the more that you can make that hidden, you essentially are just reconnecting people and having those memorable moments that builds
Mm-hmm.
that brand loyalty. And we did a lot of work with them thinking through, what does that journey map need to be? How do you provide that? And how do you amplify those wow moments to really
Mm-hmm.
connect those people together that want to buy things because they love it and they want to
Right.
have that deep emotional connection.
Yeah, and I think I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. I think there are a set of things that could be sort of table stakes. In other words, if you don't do it, you're probably out of the game. And as so many companies, the pace of technology continues to accelerate. We see this dissemination of whether it's AI or buy online, pick up in store. But there's some capabilities that have become quite popular or really growing in popularity. So if you don't have them, you're out of the game. But I think so. Hopefully, everybody's kind of working on that stuff. But I think when you do, you dig into your data or you do the customer journey mapping, you start to get those nuggets of what are some additional things you can do that really create, whether it's a short-term advantage or a longer-term advantage
Yeah.
over your competition.
So for over the past 30 years, the idea of personalization has evolved quite a bit.
Right. Right.
Can you
Yeah.
can you kind of take us through that what's happened and what are some of those major milestones of personalization and why it's so important today?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a little bit of sort of chalking the field here, what we're talking about when we say personalization, because I think the term gets used, sort of loosely. So maybe bring a little clarity to that, but also I try not to make too much of a history lesson. But when I really started working in this field, um, and some of the older people here maybe remember this. Younger people will go, "What's this guy talking about?" But there was a great book by Peppers and Rogers called The One-to-One Future, which I want to say came out in like 95 or 96. And they really kind of popularized this idea of one-to-one marketing. And so people that worked in CRM for a while, I'm sure will know this. But it was this idea of, can you uniquely identify customers ideally on kind of a one-to-one basis? Can you treat different customers differently, provide a more customized solution, and then kind of develop this learning relationship with them? As you learn more, you start to navigate your way to deeper and deeper relevance. And so I think that was a really cool idea. And in a lot of ways, the way people were thinking about it, I would say in the 90s, was how do you provide kind of this shopkeeper uh, experience at scale? If you're a big retailer. So, many of us will be familiar, kind of the old days, and you still see this from time to time, where you go into a little shop and you actually know the owner or the manager, and they learn enough about you that they will suggest things to you, or when they get something new, they might call you up or send you an email or whatever. And actually, when I was at Neiman Marcus, a lot of our best salespeople would do this because they had these deep relationships with customers on an individual basis. So they got to know their preferences and wants and desires. And so they ended up having not only really good individualized customer service, but the products and services that were recommended were quite individualized. So the challenge has been how to do that at scale, because I think most people understand the more personalized you can make the experience, generally speaking, you're going to build that bond. You're going to have a greater success rate of recommending things to people, and that's ultimately good for business. So these ideas have been around for a while, and certainly CRM and CRM software has been around for a while, but most companies have really struggled to get closer to that one-to-one experience over time. And I think there are a bunch of reasons for it. And maybe the good news is there's been a lot of progress and traction that's developed in the last few years. But you've had issues of very siloed organizations. So as online has grown, you often have people responsible for e-commerce, you have people responsible for stores, you have separate databases. So getting the data, that one view of the customer, has been challenging. Many companies have gotten better at it, but that's been a barrier for a while. Trying to get attribution, because ideally, if you try something in one channel, you've understand the response, and that goes into your models that allows you to get progressively more mass customized or personalized. So there's been attribution challenges. I think, frankly, a lot of retailers that I've worked with over the years, not only where I've been on management teams, but in my consulting practice, is a lot of times there's a default to doing the easy thing. Like, it's a lot easier to run a TV ad or a YouTube, non customized kind of offering for 30% off everything this weekend. Like, we just got done with Cyber 5, right? And almost all, so many of those promotions are not the least bit personalized, right? So, everything's on sale, everybody gets the same offer, which is not enough of a discount for some people and is just giving money away to people that would have bought for less of a discount. So this kind of mass orientation that still many retailers have, they do it because it's big and bad. Uh, and it takes work to mine the data to come up with all these different offers and target them. So I think there's just a lot of legacy thinking that's made it harder for some of these ideas. But fundamentally, we have disconnected tech stacks. It's been expensive to do the data mining. It's been expensive to do the delivery. There's all sorts of implementation issues. So it's not easy to do, but I think it's getting better and better because cost of data is coming down. Operating in the cloud allows you to do certain things. Various technologies are allowing you to do better attribution. So a lot of the pieces are there to do this, to do more of it at scale. But the personalization imperative, I think, really comes back to what we started with, which is in a world where customers have infinite choice and it's very noisy, if you're not doing something that captures my attention and treats me more as an individual as opposed to just one of 300 million people or whatever that might buy from you, you're just, your odds of breaking through the clutter and winning the sale just are down. And I think it, if anything, the imperative for personalization just continues to increase because the world is getting noisier and noisier. There's more competition, there's more discounting, there's all this kind of stuff that makes it really harder to stand out, particularly if you're going up against much bigger companies that just have enormous resources and just have that top of mind awareness. And so, how many people just default to going to Amazon or Walmart or whatever because they know they're going to get a good price, they know they can get it quickly, they know there's enormous assortment. So if you're trying to stand out in that world, you're not going to out Amazon, you're not going to out Walmart, right? Or very few people have any chance of doing that. So for 99.9% of us, we're going to have to think about how to be more relevant, be more unique, and personalization is often the way to do it.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting as you talk about all the big ones. And the reason that they became the big one is because they took a different strategy towards a traditional market. And
Mhm.
so it's the same thing. If you're going to compete with the Walmarts, with the Amazons, you can't beat them at their game. They've mastered a different game at a new scale. You have to
Right.
figure out a different game. Otherwise, it's going to be that race towards the bottom of the what you call the default of the easy, and just discount and discount and discount, and eventually they won't be a retailer.
Yeah.
The retailer that you started with is gone, and it's one of the
Mhm.
retailers I loved as a kid, but the Sears is gone. It's just that doesn't
Right.
they didn't adapt, and so there's danger of that.
Absolutely. And by the way, I just do a shout out to my friend Seth Godin again, which is, one of his great quotes is the problem with the race to the bottom is you might win or even worse, finish second. And so, yeah, you got to be careful. The one thing on this topic I'll just mention really quickly, because I think it's not, it's kind of a backdrop, I think, for many people to think about is, and this is a little bit oversimplified, but I think what we see a lot of times in retail, particularly in a world where e-commerce and digital first kind of journeys have become, pretty commonplace, is the difference. I call it buying versus shopping. Some people call it errands versus experiences. But it's this idea that in many cases we either are in a very kind of left brain search, get something off our to-do list sort of mode, or we're really more in kind of discovery and we're willing to invest more. And what's happened, and again, it's overly black and white, but if you think about the reason people go to Amazon or the reason people go to Walmart is, you pretty much know they're going to have what you want, at a decent price and an enormous selection, and you can get it quickly, whether it's shipped to you or you can just go into the store and have it. So in that world, there's such a default kind of mentality. And you even see this in with Home Depot or Lowe's or some other, very prominent brands where the customer is like, okay, I need to get these five things. What's my first choice, whether it's online or in a store to go to? And it's really hard for other kinds of retailers to break that pattern. And those, as you mentioned, those businesses are really about price, convenience, scale. There's nothing, there's very little personalization at a Walmart, right? But you've got this fast sort of stuff. So it's very difficult to inject yourself into that equation by playing the same game. So there's really kind of this fork in the road. And I think the more you understand kind of what mode the customer is in, one, you just may not even try to go down that path in the first place. But then you get much more deliberate about, okay, are there any opportunities for me to differentiate myself because I've got better customer service or a more unique assortment, or things that aren't about price and scale. And again, that's where I think there's a real opportunity to leverage data, to leverage a clearer view of the customer's wants and needs, and then whether that's fundamental in the products you carry or whether it's more these personalized strategies. I mean, I think both are probably important.
No, and I think it goes back. You've brought this up a couple of times about the importance of customer mapping, thinking about them, how they. There's a big reason why at Wizeline we're very busy in our design practice, helping helping our clients think about that experience, think about how to differentiate. And then on the data
Mhm.
side, we're
Yeah.
the places that have made those investments in the data strategy, the places that have figured out how to connect their tech stack, the places that have built and we've worked with to make them in a multi-cloud position are the ones that are well positioned to build these tailored experience, come up with ways to optimize different suppliers.
Yeah.
An apparel retailer that we do a lot of work with, and they've made a huge investment with us in their data strategy and direction. And now, because of it, they can leverage that to tailor the assortments based on where there's demand. When you
Hmm.
have these experiences where the economy is different and there's more pull at the value perspective, they can do that. If they can figure out ways with the work of suppliers to provide low
Hmm.
cost solutions, but it all comes into that data strategy and thinking about the data and thinking about how to apply it in this way. And so
Yeah.
the ones that get the
I,
data, the ones that invest in that data strategy are really going to be able to have the ability to attack the value retailers.
yeah. I'm curious, Ben, whether you see, because, one of the things, it's kind of like this knowing doing gap, because a lot of these ideas have been out there for a long time, but it's not always the case that knowing about these opportunities, like you don't have to go to many conferences or read much stuff to know that some of these things can be important. Yet many retailers don't pursue them. I'm curious whether you've seen any, like, what's the difference between the retailers that get it intellectually, but actually are willing to make the investments and make those changes.
Well, where we've had luck, they've either had there's an imperative because they have leadership around them that sees it and they
Hmm.
recognize that it's a different way. They're not thinking of that. You brought it in earlier, kind of that legacy way of thinking, and they realize
Hmm.
that you need to think about retail in a different way.
Yeah.
Or we've worked with them in ways to figure out how to build the business case to make it worthwhile. That there's people in the organization that see the value in it, but they need help building the strategy and direction in order to execute it. And
Yeah.
you people follow the vision, they follow that direction, they follow that pieces. You have to be able to help sell and show and demonstrate that story for the group to get excited about because to do these types of transformation, it's different and it is different to the way the model is today and it's
Yeah.
very easy to be in it. My uncle was on the team that worked at Polaroid to build a digital camera.
Mm.
They were early edges in this. They tried to do it, but the organization was designed around making money selling cartridge and film, and
Right.
the business model didn't. Despite seeing it, they could never get the economics right to do it, and so it's a combination of both seeing it and
Yeah.
having the ways to make the business model viable because we're not doing this just for the as much as the memorable connection is important, it's got to make
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. One thing actually may just mention briefly, because don't want to sort of get off the topic, but I think one thing you're talking about that I actually get into in my latest book, Leaders Leap, is reframing the way we think about risk. Because I think a lot of times when companies are slow to make these changes, they perceive investing in new areas or trying new things as risky. And what I see a lot of times is actually your hesitancy is the riskiest thing of all, because when the world is moving very quickly and you've got disruptive competitors or just competitors that are stealing market share, the hesitation becomes the risky thing. But it's not human nature to be risk seeking, and so this the if people know Clayton Christensen's work on the innovator's dilemma. I mean, this has been something we've seen for a long time, but I think we really have to change our relationship to risk and realize that incrementality in many cases, I mean, we need to do some of those things, but the slow and steady approach actually just means you're going to fall further and further behind and get run over by new competition or just people that are moving much much faster. And so one of the ways I think around this, which I think is very, very important in personalization work in particular, is the willingness to test, building a culture of experimentation and trying stuff and being able to iterate quickly. One of the things we had a lot of success with at Neiman Marcus, which was very much a change in culture there, was starting to do a lot of these personalization tests. And some of them were quite small in terms of the time and investment, but we would start with some hypotheses. We might do some A/B testing or various scenarios, but we would iterate through a huge number of things in a number of months. And, we'd say, oh, this $50 gift card offer would drive cross-sell or something like that. And we'd model it based upon history and preferences and some kind of basic data mining thing. And then, we would discover, oh, we thought that would work. It didn't. Okay, we drop from that, or this part worked, and, let's do another iteration. But many companies are hesitant. They haven't really built that muscle, or they just don't allocate the budget to, and it doesn't have to be, 50% of your budget. It can be like when we started, it was like 0.2% of our budget. It was very small, but then it grew and grew and grew as we got traction and we could make the business case.
No, the idea that everything is an experiment and shifting your culture in that way to operate is really powerful to enable this. And
Mhm.
I've both helped organizations do that in my previous life and seen when they've been able to do it. And it is really fun to be part of that when the risk of trying something new is removed, and you
Mhm.
just make it small enough that you can get feedback and you learn. And I think your view that we tried things, we had a hypothesis, we thought it would work, and it
Mhm.
completely didn't. Those are the
Yeah,
moments that you go, well, why didn't it work? What happened? What can we learn from
yeah.
it? What can we do? Instead of this, if you're too execution focused about nailing it initially, you lose out on those opportunities. You learn out those opportunities and learning. You lose out on the ability to adapt, and those are the ones that are going to struggle because you have to have that muscle of experimentation built into your culture.
Mhm.
It
Yeah,
won't work because it's only going faster.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, I want to take a quick time check. We're halfway in, and remind everybody that is on the webinar that please ask your questions. We will save time at the end to do any answer any questions for Steve and myself. But just remind you, type into your Zoom chat, put that Q&A, and we'll incorporate them. Otherwise, I'm going to get back to Steve a little bit. And so we talked about data. We've talked about how to make things memorable. We've talked about human side of this. There's everyone is so excited about AI, but there's a danger of AI that you get sucked into the word salad of AI and get all
Right.
excited about into the hype. How do you balance that and actually achieve real results with everything that's going on in AI?
Sure. Well, I'm personally very excited about the potential, and I'm seeing both clients and others that they're investing pretty heavily in it. I would say most of it is either somewhat mundane applications in that they're using AI to automate things they've already, they're used to doing, whether that's imagery or just kind of souping up some uh, existing personalization strategies just because the AI's potential to do faster, cheaper iterations. But I think the long term potential is very, very exciting. Yeah, and it's easy to. I mean, first of all, as I'm sure many people know, AI is not new. There are plenty of companies that have been using. I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on your definition, but certainly machine learning is not new. Um, I worked with one company that, for example, was doing outfit recommendations using AI, and they've been in business more than 10 years. So many of these things are not totally new. I think a lot of the excitement is around generative AI, large language models, and their ability to do things that we're already doing much more efficiently. And like I said, that's kind of where we see some of the quick wins, I guess you could say. But the ability to glean better, different insights from massive amounts of data. I mean, I think that is very, very exciting. and to be able to, whether it's using imagery or what have you, create many different kinds of treatments to put in front of customers and just manage that. Like that's pretty exciting as well. um, so to me, it's, you got to be learning what's out there, really understanding, getting past the word salad to come up with some, particular business use cases that are potentially of interest. And in a lot of cases, it gets back to what we were just talking about. Stand up some experiments. I mean, I think that's what I'm seeing with a lot of retailers now is a lot of experimentation because it's not clear automatically. I mean, some of it is just forcing you to learn, right? Actually trying stuff because it's cool to talk about it and study it. And we read white papers and listen to conference speakers. But, most, one of the great, I actually have this in my current book is, there's insight that's gleaned from analysis and there's insight that's gleaned from action. And I think in many cases, actually trying stuff is the way to get the best insight, particularly when it's a new area. So I would just recommend for most retailers standing up, experiments to dip your foot in the water and learn because it's not always clear what's going to
Yeah.
work the
Yeah.
best. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and as you were talking, I was a little bit also as you look at the framing of the errands versus the experiences. A lot of the experiments and a lot of people, what they're doing is they're looking for the easy stuff to automate away. It's the
Right.
errand type side of it, which
Yes.
is helpful. It gives you more headspace to be able to do more. But to me, the next wave is how do you make this into the experience side? How do
Yeah.
you really change the way you're thinking about it? And so we've been doing a lot of work with media companies,
Mm.
and one of the things that has come up is they have so much noise, so much they need to do that they just can't process it. And so they're in this balance of kind of how to solve the errand problem, but also with the experience. And we've built a tool to take live video, be able to do a sentiment analysis on it, be able to segment it out, be able to post it to particular channels, be able to tailor that experience to different types of customers and in rapid fashion. It's almost
Yeah.
magical when you're able to balance both the errand and the experience to make something that you never thought was possible and have that
Right.
kind of remarkable moment that you pull together. And media companies we work with are eating it up. And so I think
Yeah.
that's just a taste of the kind of things that are possible when you balance both.
Yeah, and I think, one thing I was going to mention earlier, this could be a whole other topic, maybe we don't, given our time, we don't want to get into, but, a lot of times when we look at retailers that are either in deep trouble or just struggling to move ahead, what you see a lot of times, unfortunately, I mean, it's understandable, is the focus on cost reduction, store closing, those kinds of things. But most retailers that have, like I always joke around that if you see a retailer that's closing a lot of stores, it's almost never the case they have a too many stores problem. It's the case that they have a relevance problem. We spent a lot of time when I was at Sears and things were starting to not go so well cutting costs, but our problems were 95% revenue and like 5% cost. But the problem is when you can't figure out how to drive the top line, the only thing you have is cost reduction. So it's very important. I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on cost reduction. I'm not saying you shouldn't think about closing stores sometimes because that's often the thing. And particularly with something like AI, if you can find those kind of quick win or relatively easy ways to put some money in the till, go for it. And then you can use those savings to invest in things that may take you, may are more profound, but probably will take you multiple years to really get the full benefit. But I think, the whole point of personalization, I mean, there are things we need to do to optimize the cost and get efficiency. But the whole point, particularly in a world, and we didn't quite get to this, but we were talking earlier about the collapse of the middle and the concentration with some big retailers. The reality of the past couple of years, and I think this is going to be the reality at least for another year, is when you look at the total growth, at least in the US, the incremental growth is very concentrated in just a few retailers. Most retailers are having a hard time generating positive sales. So you're not going to cost cut your way to prosperity. So how do you acquire more customers? How do you convert more customers? How do you do the add-on sales, cross shopping? How do you get more frequency? How do you get more retention? That's going to be about differentiation and relevance. So personalization is not the only answer to it, but the more you can treat different customers differently and find ways to create that distance between you and the competition, those are the things that give you the chance to retain the customers you already have and sell more stuff to them. But it's also the thing that is going to increase your odds of getting, standing out in a crowded marketplace and having a chance to get that incremental market share. Because, like it or not, many retailers, if they can't grow relative market share, they're either stagnant or their business is going to get worse. So that's where, going back to the imperative, this isn't like nice to do or it's fun to do new technology or experiment with Gen AI or whatever. This is something that's critically important. So if you're not pushing harder on this and you're not doing either, scaling up stuff that's working or doing more aggressive segmentation, or I'm sorry, well, segmentation that leads to personalization, you probably are going to fall further and further behind.
So, so
Thanks
what
for
are some
coming to
of
my
the
TED Talk, by the way.
uh, so so how do they get past it? So they have to look at personalization. How do they get past those common challenges? How can they get started?
Well, I think a lot of it is doing, really understanding what you know about your customers in a useful way. It's funny, we've been talking, it's probably another topic, but I've been talking about customer centricity forever. And my experience is most companies and retail are terrible at customer centricity. They talk about it, they view it as customer service, but when you actually look at, what do you know that's actionable by customer segment, by doing an audit of how are you actually doing on acquisition, how are you actually doing on growth, whether that's conversion, cross sell. Most companies that I have dealt with, and some of my consulting clients aren't exactly a random set of folks. I mean, usually when you're reaching out to consultants, you've got some challenges, but uh, my experience, and I've talked to a lot of my colleagues about this, is it's really appalling the lack of true customer insight, actionable customer data that many companies have. So that to me is a starting point. Like, where are you on that? Where is the highest leverage? What gaps can you fill in? But then with your existing information, what can you do to push forward on treating different customers differently? So develop hypotheses, develop tests, put those in to practice. And there usually are some things you can do that are not a massive process change, don't require totally new technology, don't require a ton of money. But eventually you're going to get to the point probably where if you don't have the foundational elements, if you've got a disconnected tech stack, you don't have the tools to execute some of these things at scale, maybe you don't have the skill set in-house to do the kind of data mining and ideation around some of these different personalization strategies. You may have to address those issues, but if you don't get started, again, you're just kind of my mantra here. I think, in a world that's moving very quickly, if you go slow, you are losing relative position. So you got to get started. You got to move faster and try more stuff. The other thing, I'm just going back to AI really quickly, because I know we're going to shift here to Q&A in a second. The other thing I'm really excited about is this idea. I mean, I've heard people describe it as the agentification of retail, but using intelligent agents to help provide more directed search. So this to me is a little bit, I mentioned my experience at Neiman Marcus with our salespeople, where the salespeople knew this information and had tools to help put outfits together or find products. But think about how you can use technology rather than do a search on a web page to be like, black running shoes size 11 or something, and that just brings up a list of stuff and you can sort it or whatever, but actually do more natural language queries where agents can go out and find things in a much more fine-tuned way that meet your needs and not present, so it's like having the best personal shopper, in the face-to-face mode, doing this through technology. And I think that's where some of what people are working on in AI. I mean, that has huge potential. And so there you're really treating me as an individual. You're empowering me with technology for me to describe my unique needs. And then you're going out and scouring the globe, perhaps, to come back with much, much better tailored offerings than I can do myself doing search, either Google search or search on a website, or some of the available tools that are out there. I think that's really exciting. And we're still in early days, but I think that we're going to see a lot of acceleration there. So I would be paying attention to this intelligent agent side of things.
Yeah, actually, this morning I saw some work from Tableau around the same thing on the idea of using AI initially as personalization to help like collect data and help you just summary and get to it first, and then the next phase is and then build these tailored, personalized assistant models
Hmm.
specific to your needs, and then the next
Yeah,
is then how to use all of that information to help act upon it, help solve problems
right.
for you, help do. And so if you can get that data, get it personalized, and you can build that,
Yeah.
there's many of us that would love that experience rather than the errand of things that we have to do on a regular basis. And the
Yeah. And
one,
I think, yeah, just one quick thing on that. I think what we're going to see is kind of a flip in so much of what is done, I think, from a personalization. If we just think about more mass customized email marketing, let's say, or dynamic personalization on a website, or those kinds of things, that's the brand saying we're going to use our data to target you. It's very much pushed
Mhm.
by the brand, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's not a value judgment. What I think, though, is interesting, because then we're kind of intelligent guessing what the customer wants, like you bought this, or Netflix, Spotify making recommendations because they're gleaning
Yeah.
insights from all this data, and that can be super helpful. And certainly lots of people have had success with that. What I think is interesting, though, is to give the power to the consumer to say, this is what I want. Now, there's a merit, because sometimes customers don't really know what they want because they can't imagine possibilities, or they don't have access to all the data. So it's this merging. But I think empowering the customer, and people that can figure that out, whether it's a retailer or a tech company, that's super interesting, because I think we're never going to be able to get totally inside somebody's head. And if we can give the tools to an individual to better meet their needs, along with what we can do from a data mining, targeting, using AI, whatever it might be, to make better guesses, that's super powerful. So I think there's this opportunity to really enter a kind of new age of personalization. And it may not happen on a massive scale in the next year or two, but I think the potential is definitely there, and a lot of the pieces are just coming together. Not only with the kind of infrastructure and some of the other software tools that are out there already, but when you layer AI on top of it, I think that's super exciting.
Yeah. No, it is. It is. Um, okay, so we're starting to get a couple of questions in the Q&A. While they kind of get those questions kind of queued up for us, Steve, what are some things retailers should focus on for 2025 to be relevant and have an option to differentiate?
Well, there's a few things, some of which we've talked about. I mean, one is, I think you just have to be rigorously honest about what your situation is. If you're really struggling to gain share, um, and drive profitability, really go deep and be honest about what the underlying issues are. And I think there's a lot of times just sort of glossing over that it's all about macroeconomics, or whatever, and those are important. But I think just this brutally honest statement of where things are as a starting point. Some of the things we talked about earlier, I mean, doing a really good kind of state of the customer, uh, is always really, really helpful. And I think doing that based upon different customer segments, and then how you're doing at kind of the stages of customer development. Are you getting the traffic you need? Are you getting the engagement and acquisition? And just kind of where are there opportunities along that kind of throughput equation, be a little bit engineering about it. The customer journey mapping, I think that's almost, it can get pretty wild and hairy to do it really thoroughly. So I know it's intimidating for people. So I'm not necessarily suggesting you map out every possible journey, but even starting with a high level, looking for those friction points, looking for opportunities to amplify the wow, that can, start to guide some things to work on. And then, always be testing. Um, I think, as we talked about earlier, that I think has been important for a long time, but I think it's just too hard to figure out. The last thing I'd say about it is, and this is not super helpful, I think 2025 is going to be a very challenging year for most retailers. And some of that is it's just hard to, we got lots of macroeconomic kind of issues. We've got, uh, wars that, can affect how the consumer is going to feel, have supply chain disruptions, energy shocks, those kinds of things. In the US, we've got a new administration that, is saying things that could be very detrimental to retail, but we don't know how much of that is bluster and what the timing is going to be. So I think it's a very volatile, uncertain environment to make plans. So I think that it puts a premium on agility and kind of contingency planning. So I just think it's hard to predict. I would sort of err on the side of, to be aggressive about testing things, but also be kind of cautious in terms of your overall outlook.
No, that sounds great. So Steve, here, first question. Who out there is doing a good job with amplifying the wow?
Well, I think a lot. It kind of depends a little bit. If you look at retailers that are gaining, I'll say smaller retailers. We talked about Walmart, Amazon. I think those are sort of obvious. But if you look at the success that Abercrombie and Fitch is having, there's a case of really understanding your customer, going deep on an assortment that's compelling, great value, attractive environments, strong merging of digital and physical. I think we see, great growth from some more, disruptor brands, Warby Parker, Viore, that again have this really clear understanding of their customer to deliver really well and do a great job of bridging digital and physical. That's not so much a personalization thing per se. They're doing some things that are personalized, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily leaders from a personalization standpoint. I think, if you look at, particularly in the beauty space, we see a lot of innovation. Ulta, Sephora, Glossier, smaller brand that's growing very quickly. They're, doing things like using their app to be able to pick the right, cosmetics, beauty, treatments, makeup looks, those kinds of things. So there's not, it's customizing, I guess, to an individual's skin tone and things like that. I think those are really powerful.
There actually is a great article about Sephora and TJ Maxx in the Wall Street Journal from last week about what they're
Mm.
doing. That same thing of helping with a wow and trying to differentiate that is worthwhile to read.
Yeah, can I make one other quick thing? And this is not sort of the whole business. It's not personalization, but one of my favorite personalization or kind of wow, not personalization, but wow aspects is what Canada Goose does with their cold rooms. So these are dressing rooms they have in some of their stores where you can vary the temperature. So the customer gets to try on their outerwear in stimulating the environment. And one of the things I think that's great about it, so this is an example of really understanding what's relevant and what's an opportunity. So this is great. They get a lot of posts on TikTok and Instagram because it's such a cool thing, but it's a very tangible way to demonstrate the value of an expensive product. So the conversion is higher, the average ticket is higher in these stores. So it's a wow because it's unusual, but it's intensely relevant to what they're trying to sell you. So this is where, I think if you really understand what could you do in a normal sales process, because people are going to try coats on, right? People are going to go to the dressing room. But how do you make that not just the normal dressing room experience that's on brand, that delivers value to the customer, and people will talk about it. So to me, that's like just a great combination of a real wow factor.
No, that's great. That's great. Second question, what is the biggest obstacle when it comes to retailers rethinking the risk equation? What really holds them back?
Well, some of it is, I guess I would say two things. One is most people, most retailers, in my experience, don't actually try to quantify the risk of inaction or the risk of slow and steady. So I think you have to, there's a lot of like, oh, what if we open this new store format, or what if we spend a bunch of money on AI? Oh, that's $9 million, and that could be a total write-off. But they don't go and say, well, okay, but what's the cost of not doing it, or what's the cost of doing it slowly? So I think one is a discipline to really say, there are a bunch of options. There's not do nothing, there's go slow, et cetera. But actually look at the cost of those different options and being wrong about it. So I think that's just it's a financial exercise, frankly, to go through and be very explicit about your assumptions and so forth. But the other, I think, is often just the backdrop of the culture. If failure is not encouraged, if you think you're going to get fired by trying something that doesn't work, most of the companies. Two things I'll say about most of the companies that are great innovators. One is they just try more stuff than other people do. Like, it's not a magical formula. It's they just try more stuff and they iterate very, very quickly. But the other thing is failure is celebrated. Like, your career is not going to be over because you tried something that was reasonable and it didn't work. So unfortunately, a lot of times you're dealing with cultural issues, and if leadership is not pushing innovation and experimentation and supporting it, you're going to be out on your own. And it's many cases it doesn't always work out when you're out on your own. And so it's both cultural as well as just kind of some processes I think you can adapt.
Well, Steve, we're at an hour. I This has been a lot of fun. So thank you so much for all of your insights, all of your feedback. We've really appreciated your time today. I'd also like to thank Full Story for their support and helping us organize this. Steve, anything last you'd like to share before we drop for today?
Oh, I often say, go do something that scares you. Like, if there's that thing that feels like it could really move your business, but you find yourself hesitating, try to find out a way to, or try to see if you can find a way to make it happen. And
Yeah,
because you're gonna learn something, and you're probably not gonna hurt yourself too badly. At least I hope
that's
not.
that. That's fantastic. I love that. I'm going to try to do something that scares me today. So my family's going to be in horror. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. This has been really great. And thank you again, Steve.
Thank you.